Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sunday School. This is your host, Pat Flynn. Hey, sorry for the absence of an episode last week. I was traveling back to Michigan, and I have to say, I really enjoyed the trip, and we had a very great sort of religious experience while visiting Michigan. We went back to Old St. Pat's Catholic Church, which is a parish right by where I grew up, and we went to Mass there. And this church has sort of restored a lot of the traditional rites of the Catholic Church, which I tend to be a very big fan of. A lot of the old Latin rites. So for those of you who are Catholic, you may not have experienced many of these things. If you're not Catholic, then you probably haven't experienced any of them. So it's not just the infusion of Latin, both with the songs and the prayers, but just the whole structure of the Mass can sometimes be fundamentally different. So, one of the big examples is that the altar is at the very back, and that the priest does most of his prayers with his back facing the laity, and of course this is to make the prayers to God, facing God, rather than the people of the church. We're offering the prayers and the sacrifice of the Mass up to God. So it's a very beautiful thing, especially when you take the time to understand it. And this was an interesting Mass for us because it really was a hybrid Mass, and I talked to the priest afterwards and mentioned this. I'm like, yeah, it wasn't quite a fully traditional Latin Mass, which we would call the sort of extraordinary form, but it wasn't quite the ordinary form or the contemporary Mass either. It was a very interesting blend of the two, and enjoyed it very much. It was beautiful, beautiful homily. When the communion was used at the altar rails, which again, very, very traditional. So again, if you're Catholic and you've never experienced that, I would certainly encourage it. It's very attractive to me, extremely reverent. And there's around us now, they've just established a parational. They only do the sort of Latin rites for both daily Mass, weekend Mass, I believe for weddings and funerals as well. So it's a little bit of a hike from where I'm at, but I'm going to try and get there a little bit more often. So it was a great trip. Got to just, explore the old country of Michigan, the old Mitten State, which, again, I used to live there for many years. So I spent elementary and middle school in Michigan before I moved to Wisconsin, and then eventually came back to Pennsylvania, where I am now. Coffee. What a blessing. So before we get into the topic today, which I've been stewing over a few different topics, and I think you'll probably find all of them interesting. One is the difference between religion and superstition, and my contention that I think a lot of people who claim to be religious are really just superstitious, and why that's not a great thing. And especially people who have dropped away from religious affiliation were probably not religious to begin with, but almost definitely superstitious. And that if there's any type of conflict between religion and science, it's actually a conflict between religion and superstition. And religion and science are extremely complementary and really can inform one another and need to inform one another if we're going to have a proper hold of each. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Couple other interesting announcements before we get into superstition. And look, here's the funny thing. People, let me just kind of get into it a little bit now. Because people will often say, well, hey, religious affiliation is going down, particularly in the United States. People are becoming less religious. And when you look into the research, especially like the Pew studies and so on and so forth, that's not what's happening. More superstitious. They're becoming more religiously diverse. So what happens is if they were superstitious to begin with, if they didn't hold properly, if they weren't properly religious, then what they do is they might drop away from a particular affiliation that they grew up with, which for most people in America would probably be a Christian affiliation, and then they'll start going to, like things like Burning Man or spiritual yoga retreats or this or that. So it's not like people are becoming irreligious. They're just becoming kind of like, I would argue, religiously confused, spiritually confused, and superstitious to hold. So and I don't think that's a good thing. I think religion needs to be rigorous. Religion is a gift from God. It's a response to God's grace. It's a supernatural or theological virtue, as Aquinas had it. So it's not something we can figure out. Theological virtue, as Aquinas had it. So it's not something we can figure out by our own powers. So all of us can buy into superstitions by our own powers, and unfortunately many of us do. Whether it's a rabbit's foot, or going to these weird hippie concerts out in the desert, and making prayers to, quote unquote, the universe or whatever. All that's weird. That's just like neo-paganism. That is not, let me be clear, an increase in religious sophistication. That is an immense decrease in religious sophistication. That is not a good thing. It's not a good thing at all. Yet that's kind of what we see going on here. And why is that? Why is that people are losing proper religion and becoming more superstitious? Well, I think the problem is they were never properly religious to begin with. They never really responded to the theological gift, to the supernatural gift, we should say, of faith, and tried to develop a proper of the essential doctrines of the Christian faith, who God is, what he has specifically revealed to us, so on and so forth. Rather, they just probably grew up within a nominally religious setting, held, a sort of scattered series of beliefs that contained many jumbled up and contradictory philosophies in their mind. And so when those superstitions were challenged, either philosophically or scientifically, they dropped away. But that sort of religious impulse that all of us have, that yearning toward the divine, the numinous, if you will, the sensus divinitatis, that doesn't go away. You can't really extinguish that. You can work really hard to suppress it, and some people do, but that's a basic intuition. It's there for a reason. So that doesn't go away, and what happens is people just adopt a different type of superstition. Not a good thing. And look, this is the fault of, as a Catholic, I can say this is a huge problem within the Catholic Church, is terrible catechesis over the past however many decades. Now, it's getting better, and now that I am a catechist, now that I actually teach Sunday school to kids, like, I'm trying to make a difference and make sure people really understand what is it that at least Catholics believe, that we should believe, and how are these beliefs eminently and overwhelmingly reasonable. So, if people aren't properly formed in the faith, then we shouldn't expect that they will drop away in it. And this proper formation needs to be both intellectual and spiritual. Again, the religion, so understood, rightly understood, is a gift from God. It cannot be anything else. If it's less than that, then it's a philosophy, and then it needs to be compared, right? And I would argue that a lot of Eastern religions aren't really religions; they're philosophies. Take Confucianism. A lot of wisdom in the advice of our old friend Confucius, but nothing really religious. And to that extent, it needs to be compared philosophically to other systems. And in that regard, it scores some points and loses some others. Jesus, for example, if the central claims of Christianity weren't the incarnation, atonement, and resurrection, then Jesus would just need to be compared to everybody else philosophically. But that's not the central claims of Christianity. The central claims of Christianity is that God became man to atone, and that all of this was to atone for our sins, and that all of this was substantiated by the act of called a super miracle, the resurrection, right? And that was the one thing that really, really got my attention. The one thing that really, really got my attention about Christianity is like, wow, this religion is not only historic, but it's falsifiable, right? If this didn't happen, we should be able to go deep into the history and see that it was all made up. And then, what happened to me and to many others who've followed a similar path as you go and you study the history, at first you initially conclude, oh, well, it seems like this might actually have happened. And then the more you study it, the more spooky it becomes that, oh, wow, I think this really did happen. And that's part of my story. Anyways, that's part of my conversion to Christianity. I kind of went into it like many people, thinking that, let's just see how this myth started. You realize that, okay, turns out it's not a myth, and now I have all this weird data that I need to explain that is really hard to explain apart from the resurrection hypothesis. We've been through all this before. I don't want to repeat the argument now. In fact, if you want to hear me develop a full argument for the resurrection of Christ, both probabilistically and historically, and I think the probabilistic element is pretty interesting and unique and not often presented, but really powerful, then see or listen to my episode, The Difference of Jesus, and the difference he makes. I think you'll get a lot out of that. And the exciting news is I've presented that talk at a number of schools, especially virtually, and that has been picked up now as a book. So I never thought this would happen, but I am apparently writing a religious book now, sort of an apologetic work and a theological work. So there we go. That's my next. Just when I thought I was done writing books, I have another one completely different. So I'm excited for that. I'll announce that soon. But if you want to kind of get the general thesis of the book, go check out that episode. And what the heck was I saying? Oh, yeah, so I was saying that, if the central claims of Christianity were not grounded deeply in the divine, then we would just have to compare it as a system of philosophy to any other, But that's not what we do. Because you can't separate Christianity from the miraculous. As soon as you do, it's not interesting. And I would argue, so ultimately true. Got a new coffee maker, by the way. It's so much better than my old one. We used to have just a subpar Mr. Coffee. No offense. I said no offense if you're a Mr. Coffee fan. Now we got this crazy machine that looks like a Star Wars droid. Apparently is made in Switzerland or something. I don't know. But it's good. It's fun. And its name is Job. So, superstition versus religion. Where do we want to even begin with this conversation? I guess the primary point that I want to get across would be that religion is what is superior to reason, whereas superstition is what is inferior to reason. And here's what I mean by that. Good reason should be able to rule out superstitious beliefs. Philosophy alone should be able to do most of that work, if not all of it. Science certainly can do a lot of it. Okay, so if you think that I'm trying to think of a funny superstition now, without picking on somebody too much. I might just have to pick on somebody too much. Okay, let's pick on somebody. We'll pick on the young Earth creationists. Look, I got nothing against them personally, but I think this is a superstitious belief. So, first off, for a number of reasons. One is that the traditional interpretation of Genesis is not literal. I mean, we have Augustine arguing some 1,500 years before Darwin that we need not and probably ought not interpret Genesis in any literal fashion. And that God could have and probably did release certain potentialities into the universe that would have unfurled in any conceivable way over any conceivable amount of time. So fundamentalism in Christianity, as we know it, is really a development of the late 19th century. This is a fairly recent sort of religious, I would argue, superstitious belief to come onto the scene. It's not the traditional view. It's certainly not the Catholic view. But then what happens is you kind of have this, I would argue, credulous interpretation of Genesis, and then it comes in direct conflict with reason and science. And I mean, we have, I would certainly say, overpowering evidence that the universe is somewhere around 13.7 billion years old. So there's a tension there. There's a conflict there. And like I said at the beginning, is what good philosophy and science can and should help us do is to remove credulous beliefs. They are destructive to superstition and good. They should be. But what they cannot be is destructive to religion properly understood, religion properly held, truths that are actually bestowed upon us by God that we can't really work out on our own. An example of this would be the doctrine of the Trinity. We can't reason out the doctrine of the Trinity. We can't know that God is one what with three whos is the easiest way to explain it. That is not something we can get at philosophically. That's only something that can be revealed to us. Now, philosophically, we can get to a general and moral monotheism. We can look around the world. We can see that things are contingent. They exist, but they don't have to exist. There's sort of this interrelated web of radical dependency, radical contingency. Okay, and that there must be an explanation for why contingent things exist, and then there must be, in principle, even deeper, some type of logical terminus, some sort of necessary reality, a sole ultimate reality, a sole ultimate reality. And this is, of course, a very famous argument from natural theology and philosophy that's been developed over time from thinkers such as Aquinas and Leibniz and many contemporaries since. The argument from contingency. And what that gets you is sort of that, God is the sole ultimate reality, an uncaused cause of everything else, an unactualized actualizer. And that which exists through itself and is an explanation for not only itself, but all things outside of itself. So we're not saying that God doesn't have an explanation, but God is the necessary explanation for all that exists. But that doesn't give you the God of Christianity, per se, but it is compatible with the God of Christianity, right? It gets you part of the way there. It doesn't give you the Trinity, but it gives you a monotheism, because by working through these types of arguments, you be a sort of necessary reality to be beyond the universe, to be beyond space, matter, time, and energy, eliminates a lot of let's call them contenders for the title of God. Certainly can't be Zeus. Zeus he's material. He's in space and time. We've argued that whatever God is not in space or time. He's not material. He's immaterial. So you kind of arrive at two possibilities for what God could be. One is some type of abstract object, like the number 7, or God is an immaterial mind. Now, the number 7 can't cause or do anything. It's quite arguable whether abstract objects even exist at all. But certainly a concrete object, philosophically speaking, like an immaterial mind, could cause something. And that's the only candidate left. And then once you get that, again, this is how we can, through reason alone, this is, again, called philosophers, right? Through reason alone, we can sort of narrow the field. All right, well, what definitely isn't right when it comes to religious belief? All right, well, we've just argued our way out of pantheism. With one good argument, we can eliminate pantheism, we can eliminate polytheism, we can eliminate dualistic philosophies, and so on and so forth. And then we can sort of continue to build the case. And science is helpful here as well, because science kind of reaffirms the contingency of the universe, especially if you look at Big Bang cosmology and realize that there was a sort of an absolute beginning to the universe, which is different than the argument from contingency. And I hesitate to even bring that up because it often confuses people. So what the argument from contingency says is that God didn't have to bring the universe into being at any one point in time, but rather God is necessary to explain why the universe remains in being or is sustained in being at any point in time. So you think of remains in being or is sustained in being at any point in time. So you think of what it does is it answers the question of why is there something rather than nothing. There must be an ever-present ex-nihilator of all that exists. So the way to think about it is that God is that which donates being to everything in existence at any particular moment in time. It's not a temporal thing. It's an ongoing, omnipresent, like creation is an ongoing event. Every second that we continue to exist, we are being created by God, is the way to think about it. But if some people might say, well, why can't the universe exist necessarily? Can't the universe just be a necessary existence? And no, it can't be, for a couple of reasons. There's nothing, again, either about the fundamental stuff of the universe, strings or quarks or what have you, or the fundamental laws of the universe that couldn't have been some other way. Something which is necessary must be, in principle, impossible that it could have been some other way, right? Anything that could have been some other way than what it is a contingent thing. But a necessary reality is not something that changes over possible worlds. Now, I don't want to get too technical with modalities and things like that, but God is a being that could not have not existed and could not have been any other way than he is. But there's nothing about the universe that says that the universe could not have not existed. In fact, most of contemporary cosmology would suggest that the universe had an absolute beginning, that there was a point when the universe didn't exist. But putting that aside, just sort of coming at it purely philosophically, again, there's nothing about space-time reality, no matter which way you want to cut it, that explains why space-time reality is the way that it is. A type of transcendent answer for these things. Again, the necessary reality cannot be the universe itself. So, I didn't mean to dive into any sort of technical argument today. By the way, we've done episodes on the argument from contingency. In fact, 2 now, one upcoming one in the past. So if you want to better understand that argument, go listen to the conversation I had with Josh Rasmussen, who is an analytic metaphysics philosopher from Notre Dame. That was maybe even a couple months ago now. So just go check that episode out. And then recently, upcoming, I had a Dominican preacher, priest, and friar, Father Thomas Joseph White, who's also a philosopher and theologian, come in, and he gave another kind of demonstration of that argument. So you'll have that to look forward to. But the point is, what it does is it doesn't compete with religion, but it helps to eliminate superstition. Okay, so for example, let's go back to pantheism and the idea that the universe just is God. Well, that's kind of problematic for a number of reasons. It's problematic philosophically, and you hear people like this. This is proof of my point. How many people online every day do you hear offering like good thoughts to the universe, hope the universe gives me what I want today, or thank you, universe? And they're like worshiping the universe. It's really silly. The universe is a creation. All right? If you're going to worship the universe, you might as well worship a trash bin or a toaster. It just doesn't make any sense. Again, philosophically, there's nothing about the universe that we should even think that the universe is divine. We just said that it's contingent. Or if it is divine, it's really confused because there's a lot of like bad stuff in the universe. So you would have to think that God is a mixture of some stuff that's good and a lot of stuff that's problematic, which is why many people are sort of dualism, right? But if we want to affirm that God is all good, well, then God must transcend the universe. And we could say that there's something has gone wrong with his creation, which Christians do. We have that doctrine of original sin, which is the result of our turning away from God. But not that there's badness within God. He might permit it, he might allow it, so on or so forth. So it's morally problematic. It's philosophically problematic because, again, if the universe is contingent, we've just made God contingent, which is very inconsistent with any proper conception of God as the highest conceivable being. The universe doesn't explain its own existence. And scientifically, there is no evidence that the universe is God. Like, so if people think that God is in the universe, and then a scientist says, well, there's no evidence of God, that's a fair objection, right? Because if God is in the universe, or God just is the universe, then which we're saying God is in nature, is in the universe, or God just is the universe, then which we're saying God is in nature, then we should expect science, which is an investigation, it's methodological naturalism, investigation into nature, to turn something up about God, which it hasn't. But, so that's, in that case, evidence of absence is absence of evidence. We should not think that God is in the universe or is the universe. That's either philosophically or scientifically, that is not a sophisticated position to hold. That's a superstition, okay? But in the Judeo-Christian theology, God never was in the universe or equal with the universe. God created the universe. The universe is a creation, creatio ex nihilo. God transcends the universe. So if somebody says, well, there's no existence of God in the universe, well, now you're making a category mistake. We don't think that God is in the universe, so we shouldn't expect a microscope or through a telescope. Like, what are you getting at? But what we should expect is that if God created the universe, he should offer very powerful explanatory scope and simplicity for what we do experience within the universe. And to that extent, I think God is an exquisite explanatory hypothesis. Now, I hesitate to ever use the term God and hypothesis in the same sentence. I think that's kind of degrading, but sometimes you just need to do that for the sake of argument. And what I mean by that is God offers a wonderful foundation for the explanation of many different things, such as why the universe exists instead of nothing, why the universe is incredibly finely tuned for the emergence of intelligent life, why the universe is intelligible to begin with, why we experience objective moral values and duties, why consciousness is not reducible to physical processes, values and duties, why consciousness is not reducible to physical processes, and of course, the historical emergence and evidence for the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Just to name 6 things. I think and the case goes beyond that. So when you think of it that way, you think, oh, wow, there's actually extraordinary evidence for the existence of God, so long as you're not making the category mistake of thinking that God is someone or something that we could find floating around in the universe or being equal with the universe in some way. That's just superstition. That's just not having the right definition of who God is or the right belief in God. And unfortunately, a lot of people subscribe to these superstitions, and that's why they lose their faith. That's why they renounce, and many Christians as well. Many Christians still hold to this very babyish, superstitious idea of some guy in the sky with a beard. And that's God. I don't know what. I'm sorry that you didn't get the proper formation and the training that you needed. And guess what? Neither did I when I was young, which is probably why I fell so far away from the faith and considered myself an atheist for so many years. It wasn't until I took the time to really train myself in philosophy and then go back and really study what the faith was about that I realized, okay, I'm glad I was able to wash away these superstitious beliefs, because now I can be properly religious, right? Now I can really respond to God's grace in, I think, the way that he ultimately intended me to. Obviously, I'm as a Catholic, I full on subscribe to the providential ordering of the universe in relation to human free will, of course. So, in hindsight, my process makes perfect sense. But now I'm deeply concerned about trying to give people the best formation right from the beginning. So that way they don't have to necessarily fall away and perhaps never come. They're so broad-sided because they held so many superstitious beliefs that they never give it a chance again. They're never even open to reconsidering that maybe some of the things that they thought about Christianity or God or whatever were just entirely misconceived from the start. That's a real danger. It's a real danger, and it's something that, when I go to teach Sunday school to my little kids, I'm trying to give them the most solid, and 4th graders, but they're absolutely bright and they're super curious. I mean, we've talked about the argument from contingency, how to know that God exists rationally, not just through revelation, but at the same time not downplaying revelation. Revelation is extremely important. But giving the rational foundations for accepting God's revelation, and then using that to bring us to a higher level. So when we say religion is superior to reason, what we mean is that using that to bring us to a higher level. So when we say religion is superior to reason, what we mean is that reason gets us to a certain point, and then faith is above that. It's an extension of reason, whereas superstition is below that and collides with reason. It's inferior. So where proper faith, proper religion is superior to reason, works in perfect harmony with it, and is an extension of it to higher truths that reason and science cannot itself get to. Higher truths like the Trinity and the Incarnation and the Atonement. those types of truths, the revelatory truths that we could never reason out or learn through methodological naturalism or anything like that, that's religion proper, right? And then theology is kind of, exploring the development of doctrine and the logical coherency once we are given and have accepted revelation. Okay, well, what can we make sense of it now, these truths that God has revealed to us? So again, theology is really an extension and perfectly compatible with philosophy, reason, and science in its proper context. The problem is superstition. Too many people are superstitious. Superstition is bad. And to the extent that good philosophy and good science removes superstition from people, that's fine. But the move isn't then to go adopt a different superstition, right? Which so many people do, like an Eastern superstition or just a sort of vague spirituality. No. What you want to do is you want to get refined. You want to get sophisticated. That's what religion is. Religion should be rigorous. It should be tough. It is tough, right? It's a gift. God gives you the grace to get it done. He gives you the ability to believe and the ability to persevere. But you got to respond to that. You got to work with it, okay? And it transforms you, okay? Mentally believe is the sort of transformative power of God's grace and the Holy Spirit to elevate you to a higher and better understanding of God's truth and to the Christian way of life. So anyway, that turned into something of a rant or a ramble there, but I hope this was interesting to you. I hope it was somewhat useful. We've got a number of interesting interviews coming up. Like I said, I had Father Thomas Joseph White. Speaking of science, I have a theoretical physicist coming on very soon, who is, of course, a devout Christian, a devout Catholic, very high-level theoretical physicist, by the way, very well known. So I'm excited to have a conversation with him. So obviously, here's a guy who's obviously sees no apparent conflict between science and faith or religion proper. So it'll be interesting to talk to him about that. So if you have any questions, Sunday school, or that you want me to ask this physicist, who I'll reveal who that is shortly, send me a Facebook message, honk at me on social media. Facebook messages are probably the best way, or email as well. I'd be happy to jam on whatever topics you want. Ask my fellow interviewees, whoever I'm interviewing, whatever questions you have. So thanks for tuning in. I hope this is useful. Please do support the show, if you get something out of it, of course, by subscribing, leaving a review, and passing this on to your friends. So we're trying to do our part here of just strengthening the faith, strengthening belief, proper belief, and we need your help to do it. We need your help to spread the word. So the best way you can do that, rank the show, give a positive review on iTunes, share it with your friends, and subscribe. Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.